do please continue to add who you are and where you come from and what you're interested in the chat. As Alison's just outlined, we have two speakers. First of all will be Chris Clark of Nethergill Associates, who obviously also currently farms up in the Yorkshire Dales and obviously is chair, as Alison says, of Nature Friendly Farming Network for England. He will deliver approximately about a 30-minute presentation, which will be quite technical, and it looks really interesting, on the work he's been doing with a wide range of farming businesses now. Predominantly they were upland hill businesses, but now that's been spread further wide to different types of, including lowland businesses and different livestock farms. So please do put into the chat as you're listening to Chris's presentation any technical questions or points of clarification that you want to make while he's speaking, and then Alison and I will do our best to keep an eye on those, and there'll be a short period of time that we can ask Chris to clarify those points after his presentation before we move on to Colin's presentation, of which certainly I don't know what's going to be in it. He just said he's going to give us all lots of food for thought in response to Chris's presentation. So Colin will speak for probably about 6 minutes. So that will mean there will be lots and lots of time for you all to get involved in this discussion. And we really want to see if we can create a really interesting debate. So please do put your questions for that period, the second half of the session, into the chat as well. And again, Alison and I will do our best to monitor that, group the questions, and try and make sure that all your voices are heard. I think it's a really critical time for the farming sector, and so this session is really, really timely as farmers are, facing this real uncertainty of the impacts of Brexit and what the new environmental land management schemes will mean for their businesses. So with no further ado, I'll hand over to Chris.
Helen, thank you very, very much, and welcome everybody to this afternoon's session, Nature as a Stakeholder. Helen was right in every respect except for one. That is that I've now sold the farm in the Yorkshire Dales and are between farms as we're about to move to North Devon onto another farm which is nearer family. So my background is not farming. I'm not a generational farmer, first generation farmer, but I've been through various iterations from milking in Pembrokeshire to farm manager in Bucks to farm tenant in Surrey to management consultancy to buying a farm in the Yorkshire Dales, and then working with farmers over the last 18 months to 2 years. And I've been working with, by the end of this year, I would have worked with and sat round, either actually or virtually, 80 farm kitchen tables. So we will have reviewed nearly 80 farm businesses. That gives us a set of data which is really significant. It's a set of data which not only includes the businesses, but the personal accounts of some of these farms, or most of these farms in fact. And so we have some really interesting data and some conclusions that I'm going to try and share with you this afternoon. You will hear this afternoon about MSO, maximum sustainable output, MSO, the point at which farming and nature coincide and equate. That's the first thing. The second thing you'll hear is about our approach to valuing natural capital. And you will also hear about ESI and environmental stress index, which allows society, RPA, DEFRA, farmers to measure where they are within the environment and the economics that they're operating on their farm business. And so the approach we've taken when reviewing these 80 or so farm businesses is a business approach. And this afternoon is about business. I see all the time people talking about farming, and I see people talking about conservation, and actually what we really need is successful farm businesses. So when I go on to farm, I do not advise farmers how to farm, and nor do I advise conservationists how to conserve. What I do though is advise on business. And so the approach this afternoon is about a business approach. Inevitably, there's going to be some mathematics, but I hope that I'll be talking about principles and concepts this afternoon. And these concepts, our approach, you are unlikely to have come across before. This is because, although they are relatively standard approaches within farming, within industry and business, they are not, for some reason, used in farming and conservation. So we have 80 sets of data, and the interesting thing about them all is that they are all, bar none, exhibiting exactly the same characteristics. As Helen has said, the data I have got is about livestock production, but we do have a few mixed and arable farms as well. So the findings, although I may refer to the word grass, are also applicable in other types of land management. There are 3 members in the team, myself and my wife, and a guy called Brian Scanlon, who's the mathematician. Until he and I got together 25 years ago, he'd never been onto a farm. So this afternoon is about how, if you treat nature as a stakeholder, actually and philosophically, there is a synergy, a symbiosis between food, farming, and nature. And we will talk about MSO, maximum sustainable output, valuing natural capital, and ESI, the environmental stress index. But let's start at the beginning, the farming economy. There are serious flaws. Farmers produce commodities. That doesn't allow them to set the price. That makes them really vulnerable to pricing mechanisms based on the supply of demand. And we may well see that enacted in a detrimental way if there is no trade deal in December going on to January. In addition to that, farming is really, really capital intensive. We have yet to find any of the farms able to achieve a return on total assets that is anywhere near comparable to what is going on in industry and business outside of agriculture. And to exacerbate all these problems, we have the uncertainty of Brexit, the uncertainty of where we are with support, whether it's elms and what sort of amounts there's going to be. We're getting additional risk, although we've always had that in farming with weather, and we've got always that prospect of unwanted infections. It is, in effect, the wrong business model. So what is the right business model? Well, I want to introduce this concept of free issue to you. It's a term that we've taken from industry, and it's where issues of parts are made to production cost centers for conversion into products. So you're sending off steel and plastic and nuts and bolts and this, that, and the other to be brought back into, say, the car factory to make cars. And these issues are charged out at cost, and the costs are eventually collated into overall product costing. In some cases, because there's so the bits of the parts are so small, they are issued free. They are free issues, and this helps simplify with the accounting process. Now, what on earth has free issue industry got to do with agriculture? And I did warn you that I was going to be relating to business and industry and not to farming in any significant way. So let's have a look at this. In farming, grass, fertility, if you like, is provided on a free issue basis. We get, as farmers, free sunshine, free rain, free fertility, free grass, and to a certain extent, free crops. It comes at no cost to us as farmers. And the grass makes a significant contribution to the farm profitability. If we as farmers had to buy that, the already dire state of many, many farm businesses would be even more perilous. And this free issue also can give us a basis for understanding the farm's natural capital and how to value that. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's have a look at natural capital. In my view, it's a much used but mostly ill-defined term. If it's going to have any use for either the farmer, the conservationist, DEFRA, RPA, Natural England, whoever, and to have any use for society, it must, in my view, have a definable characteristic. It must be quantifiable. If you can't measure it, it has no value. It has to also fit into accounting conventions. Now, that will come into focus more a bit later on. The NCC defines natural capital as those elements of the natural environment which provide valuable goods and services to people, such as stock, forest, water, land, minerals, and oceans. But for me, that is a romantic definition, not a quantifiable one, and we can't make it fit into accounting conventions. So natural capital is what nature's bounty gives us. It's a significant asset. And if it's an asset, it should be treated as such. Natural capital is the asset that gives access to nature's bounty. What do I mean by that? We get free sunshine, free rain, free fertility, free grass, etc. It costs us nothing at that initial point. I had a phone call on Friday from a dairy farmer in East Anglia, and he ran a big dairy herd with a fairly significant dairy processing plant. We were discussing this free issue, and we looked at how his processing plant operates, where he has to buy, that processing plant has to buy the milk from the farm. There's a transition price. And then we look at the farming enterprise and explore this free issue. The farm, the grazing animals are given free sunshine, free rain, free fertility, and free grass. Without that, the farm would have to buy that in. It doesn't have to in the same way that the dairy processing plant has to buy in milk. So nature's bounty, I repeat, comes in the form of free issue. This only has this has a real value. If you didn't have that, you would have to buy it. There is a value. This value is available to all who manage land, whether it's a tenancy or land ownership or NGO or whatever it is. It's available to all in some form or another. And if we accept that this is an asset, then you have to accept that nature is a stakeholder in a farm business. So when researching this, it became apparent that in 2007, there was a report by Cadbury on corporate governance. And that said that all businesses are expected to view interested parties, such as customers, suppliers, and employees, as stakeholders. Nature is a stakeholder in a farm business because of this free issue status. It gives you something for nothing. It is investing, it is an investor in a farm business. But it doesn't behave in the same way that stakeholders or shareholders do. It behaves in a contrary way. Why is that? It delivers a benefit. All the others demand either a dividend, a discount, or an interest payment. Nature doesn't demand that, but it is behoven on us as farmers to not only maintain that asset, but to increase that asset. That is what you do. That's what shareholders expect. But as a shareholder, nature should appear on the balance sheet with other stakeholders, and it should appear as a liability. You would think that it should appear as an asset. But because it's a shareholder, and as a shareholder you should be paying it a dividend, it then appears on the liability side of the farm's balance sheet. Always remember, please, that the word liability and asset are conventions rather than positive and negatives. They're just words. But it is a balance sheet, and it has, by definition, it has to balance. So, as a contrarian stakeholder, someone who doesn't expect a dividend but expects the asset to be maintained or even improved, it has to rank as a negative liability. Now, I completely understand how this is counterintuitive. Well, just bear with me. Now, if you have a negative liability on your balance sheet, you therefore need an equal entry on the asset side of the balance sheet. There has to be an equivalent. So natural capital, the natural capital employed, the capital employed will appear as a negative asset. And again, this will all take a bit of time for you to absorb. But trust me, this works. It might seem counterintuitive, but it explains why natural capital is to make life easier to produce a given rate of return on your assets employed in the farm business. What we don't do in farming is use the balance sheet in a way that we should be using it. We only use the P&L account. Return on total assets is fundamental to running any sort of business, including farming. So understanding the return on assets employed, really, really critical. If we didn't do this, if it wasn't on the asset side and a negative asset, natural capital would be a burden and have no commercial utility. So 4 ways, in our view, to measure natural capital. We measure it by its replacement costs. So, and we call that replacement value natural capital, RVNC. And I'll explain that a bit more after I've covered this one. The second way of valuing it, by valuing its role in delivering profitability. So how does this free issue grass deliver profitability? And we can calculate the RVNC, replacement value natural capital, by saying, if there was no grass on this farm and we had to buy it in, what would it cost us to do that, to buy in the forage or the haylage or the silage and the purchase concentrates and the additional vet and med? And that will give you a cost of the replacement value natural capital. And you can subtract that away from notional natural capital, NNC, and you end up with the value of natural capital. The third way is by valuing the income stream it actually generates, real natural capital, RNC. And the example of that would be that if you have newly planted trees on your farm, you may well be eligible for carbon offset payments. And there's been so much work by Woodland Carbon Code, Forest Carbon, Forestry Commission, and others to value that what you planted, that natural capital, that an actual revenue stream will be generated. And the final one, which is easiest to understand, but in my view, not a very good measure, is the implied natural capital. And this is anything that we have under the environmental stewardship. So there is an implied value to your environmental stewardship, your natural capital. But the dilemma with that is that it's not appearing on the whole farm generally, and the calculation used to value that is not good. It's an income foregone approach and it does not give the true value of natural capital. So how do these work out on farm? What are the economic realities on the farm? Well, the difference in our approach to the standard economic reality, the standard theory of the firm, is that we break variable costs into 2 groups. And this makes the variable costs unusually and actually uniquely in the industry non-linear. What do I mean by that? Well, there is this free issue, grass, and we've called these, and there are costs associated with that, productive variable costs, PVCs, and we've and the cost associated with the naturally available grass, the free issue grass, the variable costs associated with that are the costs associated to where that grass runs out. These variable costs, because the grass is free issue, is working with nature. The other costs are corrective variable costs, and they are called corrective because they are used by farmers to correct for the disadvantages of things like elevation, precipitation, latitude, soil type, geology, etc. And they drive production beyond the point where the grass has run out to try, and in the belief that the more they produce, the more money they will make. So they replace nature's bounty with substitutes after the grass has run out. This is substituting for nature. Now, I'm not going to go through this in any great detail, but every farm we work on gets a chart like this. And we can tell them where their profits are at their current output, and we can tell them where their profits are, where they would be, where their profits would be if they only used the naturally available grass. And so there's some really interesting conclusion that we can draw from that. So the point that the farm is at its most profitable is where the naturally available grass runs out. And we've called that MSO, maximum sustainable output. And this is a true farm here. And if they reduce their turnover from this point to this point, they would be better off. Okay, now there's all sorts of other things that go on, like if they reduce their fixed costs, they'd be better off as well. But reducing, making the most use of the naturally available grass or the naturally available fertility if it's an arable farm is what drives the profitability of farm business and the effectiveness of farm businesses. And because they're not using additional cost beyond where the naturally available grass runs out, they are at their most profitable, and nature is at its best as well. So moving this farm in this direction towards MSO will make this farm better off. It will reduce its stock numbers, reduce its corrective variable costs. It will be better off. Now we may want to come back to that a bit later on. So we have this MSO, maximum sustainable output. It is the inflection point between the PVCs, productive variable costs, and the CVCs. Okay, this is the MSO, where that inflection point takes place, where the naturally available grass runs out. It is also the point where the profitability is maximized, where the replacement value natural capital and the notional natural capital are maximized as well, and the yields are optimized, whether it's the number of stock or the amount of cereals that you grow or vegetables. At MSO, that is the position where you are at your best financially, and nature is at its best as well. Now we have 80 farms that are exhibiting all the same characteristics. So where do we go from there? Well, I talked earlier about ESI, an environmental stress index. I don't think there is any internationally agreed methodology for measuring the value of natural capital. So we've tried to come up with one. And we've now done this, not on 80 farms, because we've only done it in the last few weeks, the last 18 weeks or so. We've come up with an environmental stress index. It is, in fact, an economic and environmental stress index. It is the measure of the compromise between the economic reward and the change or damage that occurs to the natural capital because of that operation, those operations. It can be a numerical scale, similar in approach to the Richter scale. Okay, what does it look like on farm? Let's get that away. So this is one farm's ESI chart. You have on the left-hand side, the vertical axis, notional natural capital, and which, as I've tried to explain earlier, this is the point at which you are at your most profitable. And also on the horizontal scale, we've got ESI, Environmental Stress Index. And this farm is ESI at its current output is at that level there. If it moves to MSO, its profitability increases, the notional natural capital increases, and the closer you get to zero, the better off nature is. If you go to rewilding, however, you have this ESI at zero output, the profitability goes down, and the ESI heads back towards the right. It's not as bad as at the current output, but it's not as good as if you are having the right relationship between farming and nature, grazing with the right number of animals in this case, and if it's an arable farm, driving the fertility, the naturally available fertility. So this was a complete surprise to us. This is not what I was expecting to find. And of the 20 plus farms that we've done this now, the curves, the charts are all similar. They may not be in the same place, may not have the same scale, but they are all similar. They are this hairpin type chart. We do get some farms that the zero output is less than the current, the ESI at zero output is less than the ESI at current output. This farm is not, it's above, and that is because if they did nothing, and we include the support within the calculation of ESI, if they did nothing, they would be better off than they are at current output. They would be better off financially, and nature would be better off as well. ESI, Environmental Stress Index. ESI, the notional natural capital is maximized at the MSO, and the way we've calculated ESI is the inverse of notional natural capital. We've created a stress index. And this provides a basis to devise a parameter to evaluate the level of environmental stress associated with farming at a particular level of output. So there's a really simple way, or there could be a really simple way of establishing where farming is, and everybody would know exactly where they are and what it meant. Let's just move those up the way. The calculation goes something like this. There's a KTQ divided by NRFC, which K is a scaling factor, T is the topographical rating, and Q a factor that reflects the commercial quality of the mix of cover types. And we've done various different types of Q. T is much more easy, and K is too. So Q is the critical point. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. That is the equation that we are currently using. But ESI, the stress, because NMC is maximized at MSO, and we've done the inverse of that, the ESI is minimized at MSO. So conclusions. Natural capital has no value if it can't be quantified. So if you go to rewilding on a farm property, it is a retrograde step when looked at in ESI terms, because it reduces the farm profitability, and unless you can measure the additional payments that come from rewilding successfully, then it's a retrograde step. ESI is minimized at MSO. Rewilding reduces outputs progressively back to zero, and so increases your ESI, not reducing them. And this is because every farm we have is part of a managed landscape. And that managed landscape, nature has created a balance, the new natural balance. It may not be very new anymore, but it is newer than the original balance maybe several centuries ago. It is less stressful than that of a re-wild landscape. Stressful in what terms? Stressful because of the second law of thermodynamics and entropy. So a managed landscape, we've taken to be a responsible landscape, and it does not cover polluted or an adulterated landscape. So if you go back to that farm chart, where where the farm provided,
I will when it's finished.
then
I'd like to put in a question.
could be assumed to be an adulterated landscape until it moved back towards MSO.
Doesn't the new natural balance change far fewer species than the original wild?
There are various strategies that have to be put in place.
Oh God.
The first thing that farmers have to do is to maximise and set prices. Well, they can't do that. It's very difficult when they're dealing in commodity. The second, they've got to reduce fixed costs. But what we're talking about is 3 and 4. Move the activities towards MSO by cutting out CVCs. By moving to MSO, you will improve your ESI. Maximise the beneficial impact of natural capital by maximising the availability of natural grass. Moving your MSO to the right so you get more naturally available grass. And of course, the fifth is to add value. Some are doing that, not many can. These have been put in a sequential steps, because in business terms, this is what you have to do first. But 3 and 4 is what we are concentrating on this afternoon. So, farming at MSO. By simply operating at MSO, a farm business will avoid the purchase of feedstocks and artificial fertilizer. And when we do that calculation on farm of the cost, we haven't really understood the energy consumed in its production and its delivery. By operating at MSO, a farm will also be minimizing the change imposed on its environment from year to year, and therefore the effect on entropy. If we allow farms to go back to rewilding without understanding what that actually means, the chaos that is created is worse than if we just go back to MSO. Entropy is a huge issue that we should be considering within farming, as is the second law of thermodynamics. So good farming practices will be consistent with moving to a net zero carbon position. So not only are we going to be operating more profitably, not only will nature be better off, we're beginning to take emissions out of the industry as well. And in fact, if we move to MSO, I believe from the evidence that we currently have, that we can get farming to deliver a sub-zero carbon performance. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chris. Yeah, we've had quite a few, as you'll all be aware, questions in the chat. So I'm going to try and put some of these to Chris now without risking entering into the really good debate before Colin has his time to present his thoughts. But I think certainly Jane and Tam right at the beginning had, I think, perhaps a point of clarification to make. Let me just find them on the screen again. Right. So I think really Jane and Tam, do please unmute yourself and correct me if I interpret your questions incorrectly. But I think you're talking about the concept of free issue in relation to grass and in terms of things like mob grazing. So investing that time and money into electric fencing and mob grazing, how does that get factored in? And Tam commented similarly that holistic planned grazing, you're seeking to use the cattle or the sheep to maximise ecosystem processes, which in turn will maximise pasture quality to make the most of our natural capital. So I think there's a point there perhaps for you, Chris, to respond to.
Okay, so we have not yet, in all of the 80 farms, had anybody who is mob grazing. So my assumption goes something, and my answer will go something like this, that there will be some element of increased fixed costs, but providing you are not using corrective variable costs, additional fertilizer or feed or additional vet and med, then my expectation is that mob grazing will move that MSO to the right and will be a very good thing.
Okay. And then I think Hannah, leading on, so we can discuss all these points more once we get into the debate time. Hannah Field raised, how would you value the human health and well-being benefits produced by a healthy ecosystem in a farming context? And I think nature is more than the sum of the parts.
Yeah, we haven't looked at that at the moment. We are just looking at this in farming, economics and nature terms. We haven't looked at the outside benefits to society as yet. That will come.
And then Bill Grayson has asked, could you give some examples of the two kinds of variable costs, CVCs and PVCs?
So the corrective variable costs, corrective because they're corrective with the disadvantages of whatever is on the farm, fertilizer, feed, purchase feed, purchase concentrates and purchase forage. And there are additional vet and med costs that are incurred if you are overstocked, if you have too many stock on the farm. An example of a productive variable cost would be any of the costs associated with the baling and gathering and storing of the naturally available grass.
Okay, there's quite a few, well, several points about ESI. So I'm just trying to think how best to handle this, because I think we'll probably discuss more of this after, later on. But Tam Mayer first asks, how do you numerically value different types of natural capital, e.g. the correct amount of livestock or rewilding in order to create the ESI?
So the ESI was that calculation. If there's anything that is in question, it is the weighting that we have put in on the cover types, that's the land classification types. So we put a fairly subjective, my approach to the weighting of that, and that's certainly to do with significant discussion and involvement with a whole load of other people.
Okay, yeah, there's a few more points about ESI. I think some sort of, elements of surprise and questions about, I think, so as an example, Jane Cooper says, I think I could increase my MSO if I grazed 5-acre moorland field during the late spring and summer, but they don't, because that's when the hen harriers and the owls are nesting in the tall heather. So they're putting nature first, so they're reducing the number of the sheep the farm can sustainably hold. And she just adds that they're not actually receiving any payments in any payment schemes for that. And then I think Nicholson also asks, why does rewilding produce zero output? Surely it allows harvesting of meat and potentially other fruits, berries and nuts. So without the top predators, you'd have to harvest animals. Okay,
so the first one is, unless we can measure the value, then we haven't included it. Unless you can actually define what that, quantify what that is, then we haven't included it. Okay, so there has to be a measure, otherwise it's valueless. Okay, now we may well say that hen harriers are a fantastic addition or improvement in biodiversity, but it's not measurable in economic terms. So that's the first one. The second question, I can't remember what it was. Oh, about the so we've done it on zero output, certainly. So if that hat-pin curve, that hat-pin shape, if there is a value because you are getting sales of meat, then it won't be quite as far down. It'll be somewhere else on that curve rather than that zero output. Okay, I think that's perhaps a good point to end there, because I think lots of the other questions that are coming in now we can probably pick up in the discussion. So I think, unless anybody shouts at me otherwise, I'll suggest that we hand over to Colin now to give a short presentation, which I'm sure is going to stimulate lots more discussion. So I will try and keep a tab on all the different comments and questions coming in. So over to you, Colin.
Thank you. I hope this is working. I understand it was working a little while ago when it shouldn't have been, but there you go. Should I introduce myself, do you think, a little? Because not many people know who I am.
Yes, please do.
I started life as a biologist about 50 odd, 60 odd years ago. And farming is just one of the things I'm extremely interested in. I became seriously involved in it about 50 years ago and started writing lots of, well, I've written a lot of books, quite a few of which have been about food and farming. And I came up with the idea in the early 2000s, about 15 years ago, of enlightened agriculture, which I'll tell you about in a minute. And real farming is an abbreviation of enlightened agriculture because people thought enlightened agriculture has too many syllables in it. And my great ambition is to describe a form of agriculture that really is good for everybody and is good for the natural world in very, very broad terms. And one thing that strikes me is that agriculture is right at the heart of everything that human beings do, and right at the heart of all the world's affairs, including the non-human world's affairs. And governments like ours in particular just don't seem to realize that, and they don't take it seriously enough. And very few people in the cities do take agriculture seriously enough. It also struck me a few years ago, or quite a few years ago, that to put agriculture right, you cannot put it to rights ad hoc. Absolutely everything else has to be rethought as well. The economy, the science, the underlying moral principles, the politics, and right down to the depths of what one could properly call metaphysics, which is the root of all big ideas. And I've tried to summarize all that. I shall just do a little plug in this book called The Great Rethink, which will be published, I hope, later this year. What I was going to say today, I was going to discuss somewhat critically the idea of natural capital. I thought I might be disagreeing with Chris, which would be a terrible thing, but I find in fact that we've got a great deal in common. But I'd like the opportunity at some point to talk it through with you, because I think there's a rapprochement somewhere along the way. But what my talk is actually going to be called is The Shortcomings of Natural Capital. And I'll read the notes because I want to get through it quite quickly, and I don't want to be waffling around. Right. The first premise is that if we, by which I mean the human race, humanity, played our cards right, then we and a very fair slice of our fellow creatures could still be here in 1 million years' time, in a much better state than most people and most other species are now. But that is an incredible stark contrast to what we're being told, quite realistically, by popes and scientists and activists and writers of all kinds, which is that we'll be lucky to get through the present century in a tolerable form. And of course, for many people, life is already intolerable. The fact of the matter is that if we want to seriously create a world that is good to live in and is good for our fellow creatures, then we have to design it expressly for that purpose. And that, emphatically, is not what's being done. In fact, at the present, a great deal of strategy in all contexts is the precise opposite of what we really need if we really care about the long-term future of ourselves and of the living world in general. It is also the case, as I said earlier, that agriculture is right at the heart of all the world's affairs. It's the key to putting things right. Therefore, farmers really are in the front line. And governments like ours should take agriculture far more seriously than they do. Now, they will say, of course, we take agriculture seriously. We spend hours and hours and hours on it, and we spend millions of pounds of your money on it. But spending money and time is not the same thing as taking it seriously and getting down to the nitty-gritty, which I suggest they really don't do. Real farming, as I said, is short. The expression real farming is short for enlightened agriculture, and enlightened agriculture is informally but adequately defined as farming that is expressly designed to provide everyone, everywhere, with food of the highest quality, nutritionally and gastronomically, without cruelty or injustice, and without wrecking the rest of the world. But that is not how present-day governments or big industry or the world's financiers think of it. They think of it, and I quote, this is a quote I first heard in the 1970s, still with us, they think of it as a business like any other. And in line with the economic doctrine known as neoliberalism, they think of business not as the natural underpinning of a free society, which is how I think of it, and most people think of it, I think, in the West, but simply as a way of maximizing short-term wealth and concentrating that wealth in fewer and fewer hands. And this is done by encouraging all enterprises of every kind to compete in the global market for the greatest profit and the biggest market share. Let the market decide has become the global slogan. Thus, the market becomes our ultimate judge of everything that we do. Indeed, it becomes the final moral arbiter, not God or conscience or common sense, but the market. What people will pay for is deemed to be good, and what they will pay most for is deemed to be the best, and what they won't or can't pay for goes by the board. We have adjusted the language, our own language, to what might properly be called market speak. For the language of everything, that is, food, houses, music, including music, is seen to be a product, and products are conceived as commodities to be sold on the world market and valued according to their price. And this, of course, includes crops and livestock, for the neoliberal mindset is extended to agriculture. And so it is that present-day agricultural policy is not designed to provide good food, but to provide commodities for the global trade. In other words, the square peg of agriculture is rammed into the round hole of neoliberal dogma. I quite like that. Indeed, the neoliberal mindset and the market speak that goes with it is now extended to the natural world as well, to the biosphere. For the biosphere is now called the environment, which simply means surroundings. So the biosphere is valued because greenery improves the view, and people will pay good money for a nice view. As the biosphere is valued too because it provides, quote, ecosystem services. So rich people will pay good money for a devastated piece of moorland and pay other people to keep it devastated so that they can shoot grouse. And if they're even richer, they will pay even more than that to preserve forest where they can shoot bears. And even the powers that be are beginning to realize that the right trees in the right places can, for example, help to control floods, and that this can be cheaper and more effective than civil engineering. Excuse me. I don't think that cough is particularly sinister, incidentally. Indeed, on the grand scale, the present mass extinction results in large part from this mindset. The biosphere is taken care of only insofar as it provides short-term wealth, and that does not lead to a serious long-term conservation strategy. In short, if we really want to create a better world, or indeed a world that's fit to live in, for ourselves and our fellow creatures, for more than the next few decades, we can't simply throw market speak at the world's problems. We need a new mindset. So what is the new mindset? In general, the present prevailing attitude to the biosphere and to our fellow creatures is more or less exclusively anthropocentric. We operate as if we, human beings, were the only important creatures. We need to develop a general mindset, and of course is anthropocentric up to a point, but we do need to take care of ourselves as well, obviously. But a mindset which is equally biocentric or ecocentric, or one might say Gaia-centric. We need to take the natural world seriously too. We need to move away from the obsessive materialism which is at the heart of neoliberalism and accept again, as J.M. Keynes insisted, that the economy is really a pragmatic device, that it should serve us to enhance our lives and respect our values, and we should not, as we're required to do now, adjust our lives and our values to meet the demands of a particular economic doctrine, whether it's the doctrine of Stalin or the doctrine of the neoliberals. The concept of natural capital, as I see it, is very much a scion, an offspring of the neoliberal mindset. It's entirely materialistic. The only things that are deemed to matter are the things that can easily be costed, and the underlying attitude is entirely anthropocentric, meaning that we're the only species that count. Although this is ironic, since neoliberalism is actually bad for most of humanity, demonstrably. So it is that present-day farming, which is designed according to neoliberal dogma, falls shamefully short of what is needed and of what is possible. As it should be easy to feed the present population to the highest standards and to go on doing so forever, but in practice, 1 billion people are undernourished. And the neoliberal dogma applied to the natural world is disastrous. Thus, it should be perfectly possible to provide everyone with good food without wrecking the rest of the world. Yet at present, we're in the throes of a mass extinction, and present-day agriculture is a prime cause. Yet we are told that present strategy, guided by neoliberal dogma and geared to the demands of the market, is the only realistic course. There is no alternative, said Mrs. Thatcher. Why courses of action and ways of looking at the world should be considered realistic when they're so obviously disastrous is, I think, somewhat mysterious. More to the point, 40 years after Mrs. Thatcher and then Ronald Reagan first introduced the world to neoliberalism, we can see that it's been a disaster. And we can also see that there really are alternatives. And we can also see that it's not enough simply to tweak present policies. We need a whole new way of thinking. So what's involved? There are plenty of moves in the right direction. There are new laws against, and tougher laws against, wildlife destruction, which many people would like to see much tougher still. But to make the destruction of wildlife a crime is only a step in the right direction. It should be seen as a crime against the cosmos. In other words, it should be seen as a sin, which is beyond mere crime. Thus, we need to reinstate the concept of oneness, and we need to reinstate a sense of the sacred and a sense of taboo, that there are certain things you just should not do. In fact, ecological destruction should not merely be illegal and punishable, it should be unthinkable. And the value of the natural world is not simply a matter of market price. In short, I see the concept of natural capital as yet another attempt to squeeze a very big idea with huge moral and metaphysical implications into the mold of a very crude economic doctrine, basically because the people with most power in the world have been educated to think only along very narrow lines. We need to think more broadly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Colin. I think that was really, really good follow on from Chris's presentation, and I think, as I can see in the chat, stimulated lots of discussion. I think it's Tam Mayer who says, absolutely agree, Colin. I do feel like Chris's work might bridge a gap and help farmers to maintain a business case for nature-friendly farming whilst we somehow nudge a transition to a different worldview. So I think that really sums up really nicely how we can perhaps use this last half an hour to really have some discussion based on both Colin and Chris's ideas as to how we take this practically forward. We are at this change in time, certainly within UK agriculture. So how can we collectively make the most of that opportunity? So I'm not sure, Chris, would you like to make a quick response to Colin before perhaps Colin asks you some questions? Just a minute to say.
Sure. So my dilemma with what Colin has said is that I believe that farmers are integral to making nature and food production work successfully together. And it has to happen in the next 6 months, 6 years, 20 years, 30 years. What Colin's talking about is something that is going to take an awful long time to change. So whoever it was who said, I think it was Hannah said, there may be a bridge, I think that is absolutely the right analysis.
Colin, would you like to, I know you had a question in the original chat, would you like to sort of just
Yes,
responses on?
I don't disagree. I mean, I am talking about the very long term. One thing that strikes me that some people might consider irrelevant, but I consider very relevant, is the whole business of human population. Because at the moment, it's we're heading for about 8 billion people. And at the moment, it's assumed that we're going to get to 10 or 11 billion people, and that's more or less going to be where we are. In other words, insofar as people are planning at all, they're thinking in terms of how do you create an agriculture which will feed 11 billion people, and they're thinking that such an agriculture obviously has to be very, very productive, and they're thinking such an agriculture has therefore to be very, very sort of high tech. Now, all these premises are probably wrong, and at the moment the world population is beginning to level out, and if we follow the demographic curve, it will start to go down. And the reasons for this are all benign, actually. It's all to do with not women being better educated. I hate that sort of expression, very patronizing, but that women have more options now. And when women have more options, it seems of their own volition, they generally choose to have fewer children rather than more. Because in a modern world, with a high-tech world, I mean, there's plenty of places, room for high-tech. In a high-tech world, you can be pretty sure that your children are not going to die. So you can get away with having 2 or fewer. And if people have 2 or fewer, population inexorably goes down. So we could, in theory, decide how many people we really want to go down to. And many people I've spoken to on this, or talk about, well, a maximum population of 2 billion will be quite nice, which you could get to in several years. And some other people say, well, 1 billion is plenty, actually. You get terrific cultural diversity with 1 billion. But if you're thinking about 1 billion people rather than 10 billion people, then it becomes easy to envisage that the human race could last, well, I say 1 million years. And some people say if you try to reduce the human population, then you are being anti-humanity because you're saying fewer people should live. But in fact, if you increase the total span of humanity from another 100 years to another 1 million, then even though you reduce the population by tenfold, you increase the total number of humans who can live in all that time by 1,000-fold. So it's a good bargain, actually. So there's that kind of thing. Now, once you start thinking very long term, and it's not actually that term, just a few centuries, then the whole business of how you provide good food for everybody becomes much, much simpler. And it becomes much easier to see how you can integrate good farming with wildlife conservation, which is, as Chris said, a sort of prime requirement. And I agree with you that farmers must be seen as being part of the whole thing. Anyway, I hope that wasn't an aversion, but I think it's an important point.
So, I mean, I would like to suggest that people that have put questions in the chat, maybe if they want to actually unmute themselves and actually ask directly, because I think that will perhaps help stimulate more of a debate, which I think is what we wanted to achieve. So I'm not going to try and make favoritisms, but I don't know whether, well, first of all, how about Tam, did you want to comment? Obviously, you made the assumption about bridging a gap. Do you want to sort of open up a bit of discussion about how people feel that might be achieved in light of we've got the new agricultural bill coming up and the new ELM scheme? So if you would like to take to the floor.
Hi, thanks, Helen. I'm not sure that I'm really, because I'm very new to this field in many ways, but and I came to it very idealistically, I think, thinking that, you know, nature-friendly farming was the way to go. And then having interacted with a tenant farmer, realizing that actually, you know, he's trying to run a business. And I saw that these two things suddenly sort of started to bang up against each other. And so really, I'm not sure that I have anything huge to offer, but just to say that I think my philosophy and ideology are complete with Colin, and you know, but I think the neoliberal worldview is going to take such a long time to move, and I think it is moving, but it is going to take quite a long time for a new worldview to kind of become established. And whilst that's happening, perhaps the work that Chris is doing is actually going to help farmers to actually make a stronger business case for nature-friendly farming being something that we do, and maybe that will, I think, in terms of the way, I don't know, but perhaps in terms of the way that DEFRA and the ELMS and even the idea of giving subsidies for food production is at the moment, then maybe we need to create a business case for doing that in a way that works with nature but still produces a profit is what we need to do. Sorry, that's probably not very doesn't.
No,
I don't think
thank
that
you.
makes much sense.
Thank you very much, Tam. Maybe Chris, do you want to perhaps give some, working examples of how this is being taken forward within your business model?
So, Tam, you need to go back to your tenant farmer and say, actually, the closer he works with nature, the more profitable he will be. And we have 80 different farm accounts, all exhibiting that characteristic. Not one has exhibited anything else but work with nature, you will be better off. And that is because in farming, the variable costs are non-linear, and they're non-linear because we get this free issue. We are given free sunshine, free rain, free fertility, free grass. If we had to buy that, then it would cost us as farmers a lot of dosh. So understanding that working with nature is actually more profitable. Can I just add on one other thing, Helen, which surprised me hugely 15, 18, 20 weeks ago. When we got into this ESI, I was expecting, I wasn't a proponent of rewilding, but I was certainly a proponent of natural processes. I was not expecting to find that getting to MSO, moving from less stocking to more stocking, would actually enhance nature. That was a complete surprise to me. So working with nature with the right stocking rate, whether it's too much or too little, is wrong.
I wonder if there's anybody else on the call who would like to make comments that's actually practically farming. Maybe Bill, do you want to make any comments to that?
Yes, thanks, Helen. I guess I'm really taken with Chris's models and his ideas that, and it goes back to my comment about less is better, and his report, less is more. That concept, I think, the time is absolutely right for that philosophy to be applied in a much more holistic and integrated way, and society would then begin to see a host of benefits coming out of it. And the other point I made about the fact that in our chase for ever increasing yields, production, we've created a whole set of external costs that the market, the thing that we hold in such high regard, completely fails to include that in its assessment of the economic outcomes. So society, whilst it's benefiting from paying less for its food, is paying out more and more for repairing all the damage that the production of that food is creating, and the inequalities that we're now encountering. Where is all that money going that we used to spend on food? Well, all it seems to have done to me is to go into inflated housing costs. So ordinary people are absolutely no better off for the reductions that they're making, the savings that they're making in the cost of their food, because it's all going and more on what they're paying for their housing. Okay, round over.
Thanks, Bill. I mean, I think certainly we're discussing here both some really massive changes in how the whole society is structured and its thinking, and some long-term, timescales to achieve that. Whilst at the same time, we've got farmers who are facing unprecedented times of change immediately. And it's trying to find out how we, as Tam said, bridge that gap and work to move that forward in the right direction. So it'd be interesting to hear, certainly I think some of you have commented, perhaps some of you who are in positions of being advisors rather than actual land managers, what your thoughts on how we can make the most of this time to influence, what we can influence. And I know it shouldn't be too narrow, but, farmers are going to be working within the new different environmental land management schemes depending on which country they're in. We've got the Ag Bill. At some point, we'll get the Environment Bill back, although it's not been seen for a long time. So, and we've got the food strategy being worked on. So it'd be interesting to see if anybody wants to pick up on that. So please just unmute yourself and join in if you've got any thoughts about how best we collectively with this sort of interest can make impacts. Anybody want to unmute themselves?
Helen, it's Nick Renison here.
Hi.
Hi. Yeah, Chris, we did it over, what's it called? Skype chat. He did the figures on our farm. And we've gone through a phase of being overstocked. And then I've got less stock. And we're really seeing the benefits of that. And I think we had a good conversation with Chris around that. But the only way we learnt how to do it better was to do it wrong first, if you get what I mean. So we lambed 1,000 sheep for a couple of years and just got into a pickle. And now we're back down to 400 and have introduced some suckler cows in, and we're more profitable. But it's very difficult to learn that before. Yeah, you just need to do it to realise it's wrong, I suppose. Sorry, I'm not being very clear.
As another farmer, perhaps I could suggest that one of the difficulties we have as farmers is that we don't really understand what we mean by profit, and I've heard Chris give a very good analysis of this. So maybe Chris, you could just explain why the farmer's perception of profit makes things much more difficult in a lot of cases.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Bill. So most farm businesses are sole traders or a partnership. And when you do your accounts, when farmers do their accounts, those accounts are not management accounts, but accounts to mitigate tax liability. And when you're a sole trader or a partner, you get at the bottom of your accounts the word profit. But actually, it's not profit, because your drawings as a family are not included in your tax liability because you're not a limited company. So the word profit is actually a contribution to the drawings that the farm has to make and to pay tax, and to a certain extent contribution to the balance sheet through capital expenditure. So most farms who are sole traders or profit or partnerships assess and measure their success entirely by the word profit, which is wrong, or by a cash flow, their bank balance being better at the end of the year than it was at the start of the financial year. Neither works particularly well, but the cash flow approach is more accurate for farms that are sole traders or partnerships. Limited company farm accounts, generally, but not always, the farm drawings are taken out above the line, and therefore the profit is much more a profit figure.
Thanks, Chris. I just want to, I've got a few people who aren't able to actually unmute and speak, so I don't want to ignore their questions. So in particular, Jane Cooper, so there's a slight change of question here. Jane Cooper is asking about repairing damage. They have a 4-acre field that they rent that has shown the greatest regeneration in what they've done, but is going to be sold off in 2 years for recreational horse keeping, which in Orkney, where they're based, means spraying weeds and short grass. What can be done to protect land that has been regenerated so is now a diverse biosphere? So I suppose that's just, again, showing the risk of this, the differences in the way that we manage our land for different objectives, and that backward step. So I'm not sure, Chris, there is a limit to what can be done, I suppose, other than raising the profile of what is good and why it's good, and what the implications are of the norm, that sort of horsekeeping type activity.
So I don't know how to answer that particular question, but the need for education for long-term change should have started 20 years ago, and we haven't started it yet. And so, to a certain extent, what Colin is saying and what I'm saying, it's all about creating an empathy between farming and nature, and we don't yet have that. And so the horse paddock, it will change everything for if it's recreational horses, but it's changing because the people who are doing it don't understand the ramifications to nature and what they're doing. And there's an educational element to all this, and part of that education amongst society and ourselves as an industry, and I know this is going to sound outrageous, but at least beginning to appreciate things like the second law of thermodynamics: you can't get more energy out than you put in, and how entropy as part of that affects it. Preventing too much change is part and parcel of understanding how we run our business and how agriculture should be moving forward, to a certain extent along the lines that Colin was talking about.
Yeah, I think there's another point that's just sort of similar along the lines in terms of education. Somebody's saying about working with vegetable growers, and it's really about the risk of not using insurance pesticide sprays and having their crops refused by large buyers, you know, not perfect, not clean enough, which we've been talking about for decades, about, you know, the requirements that supermarkets put on farmers and growers to have the perfect produce because they think that's what the consumer wants. So yeah, another example of a real need to educate society in its broadest definition.
Indeed, but there's also the fact that if you are operating, I hesitate to say it with vegetables, but if you're operating a monoculture, you are leading yourself down a route of problems. There has to be a mixed rotation, a grazing rotation that comes into everything that we do. I've been helping a farm move from entirely cereals to which was an unsustainable business, to a business that is sustainable through grazing animals. And we have saved them £180,000 worth of sprays and fertilizer. And the increase in revenue, because they have lost this £180,000. Their margin is so much better, or will be, is getting it moving in the right direction, so much better than this monocultural approach.
Yeah, I think just on going back to the vegetable question, though, I think one of the questions was about how easy does this work translate to horticultural operations. But so maybe Chris, you could just allude to a little bit more about the different types of systems that you've been working on in terms of perhaps some of the arable options as well.
So we've done no work with vegetable growers, but our experience, because we haven't had a single farm business exhibit any other characteristics, our experience says there are non-linear variable costs in agriculture. That means that you are at your best, most profitable, when you make use of the free issue fertilizer, fertility, whether that's crops, vegetables or grass, when you make use of that free issue fertility in the best way possible. We have one farm of the 80 that does not have an MSO, a maximum sustainable output, that we can calculate at the moment because they are not using any corrective variable costs. So they are beginning, if not already, have made use of their naturally available grass, which is their cheapest way of feeding their stock. You cannot get any cheaper.
And so is that a sustainable business situation for them? Or is it going to be reliant on hopefully what the direction of new policy change might bring so that they actually get rewarded for some of those non-marketable products?
The two words were sustainable business, and defining that is critical. So a sustainable business, in my view, is a business that uses as much as possible of the naturally available fertility. It and doesn't rely so much on government support. However, it is possible that when support goes, the businesses that are in place now will not be sustainable because the support has been there to fund the drawings, fund the fixed costs of those farm businesses. And so you have to ask yourself the question, what is support for? Is support to sustain a farm business to break even? Or is support there to sustain a farm business to break even and pay a reasonable salary to the farmer and his or her family? Or is support there to sustain, to prevent the decapitalisation of nature? Now, it may be a combination of those to a certain extent, but at the end of the day, we are going to find ourselves as farm businesses, probably in a business that will require a portfolio of revenue streams, because the support that has disappeared does not allow us to live off the farm directly. There's going to be a portfolio of revenue streams required. And so your concept of sustainable business can be treated as natural fertility, which is where I come from, but others would say, well, we need to have enough income to sustain the family. Well, in the Yorkshire Dales and in the uplands, farming was never the only income into that family. There was a portfolio of revenue streams. We will have to go back to that.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Well, I think it's just all good. It's all good food for thought, to be honest. I just whether there's any other farmers. We've got probably about less than 10 minutes, really. Are there any other farmers on the call who would like to share their experiences? I know Neil's on the call. I'm not sure who else is. Anybody would like to just put forward their thoughts from a practical point of view? Hi, Neil.
Hiya. Yeah, I mean, I didn't hear all of the presentation, so apologies for that. But I'd just like to say that, you know, we've gone down a route very similar to what Chris is talking about, and it has been, you know, it's been a great thing for us, both from a business perspective, from a biodiversity perspective, and probably most importantly for me, from a social perspective, for us as a family and as you know, to getting that work-life balance right is far better now than it was previously. I don't think there should be any fear of going down this route, because you know, as I've said in the chat, we didn't feel that there was any risk to that. We measured our enterprises. We realised that at best the sheep were breaking even in the way that we were farming them at the time. And so we just felt that we could sell some sheep, which added to the cash flow. I know Chris disagrees with me on that, but it added to the cash flow, and we're basically removing a loss-making enterprise from the farm. So I didn't see it as any risk whatsoever. And I agree entirely with Nick that processes, and even when we started changing things on the farm, we made loads of mistakes, and we're still making mistakes now, but it's just a case of learning from those and making the decisions on the farm from a fully informed position rather than guessing. But yeah, fully support what Chris is saying, and he's doing some really critical work for the industry, I feel, at the moment.
So Neil, I'll just be cheeky here. Do you feel quite optimistic about the future, and do you think that what little you perhaps know about Elm as yet is that you have the confidence that might help other farmers, support them to at least start this journey?
Yeah, I mean, I've been really encouraged by what government have said, almost going back to sort of the 25-year environment plan, Ag Bill, and there was another one came out about the same time. So 3 reports, all very consistent in what they were saying. And I was really encouraged by all of those. I'm more nervous now than I have been throughout the whole process, because we're now moving to the SFI and all sorts of different things, which will be announcements about, which to me are diluting the sort of environmental message, and that concerns me massively. But hopefully the environmental stuff is in there. We don't know what the details are, but we'll see over the next month or so. But hopefully that environmental stuff is the critical stuff. But to answer your question, I'm really hopeful for farming and upland farming, because I think Chris has hit the nail on the head with his MSO stuff and the less is more stuff. And if we go down that route and, as he says, get a portfolio of incomes from food, from certain public goods, or a variety of public goods, I think there's a real rosy future for farming. We've just got to be accepting of the change.
Brilliant, thank you. I think, Rod, have you got your hand up? Did you want to ask a question?
I think my thing was really is sort of one of the words that Colin used was design, and to me, sort of one of the things is things are changing all the time. So on the farm, the environment's changing, we're changing, our behaviour's changing, and to some extent, sort of putting the direction of the MSO is fantastic. I'm all for that, but it's actually trying to put a value on it when things are changing all the time. So to me, the ethics behind it are more important. So actually making sure that everything we do within a permaculture situation, we base it on, we care for the earth, care for people, and fair shares. So those, whatever decisions we make are based around those. But it is this, all the time, everything is changing. So we need to be able to tweak as things change to make the most out of the farm, to look after nature and look after people.
Thank you, Rod. And I'm very conscious it's just about 3 o'clock, so I'm not sure whether either Colin or Chris want to just make a final point before I sum up and close up.
So just following on from Rod's point there, the MSO is a point at that particular moment in time when you have taken that measurement. Of the 80 farms, or nearly 80 farms, we have done about 4 or 5 farms twice in the last 2 years. Going back to a farm after 2 years is probably too short a time. You need to go back after 3 years. Our advice is to move to MSO over a 4-year period, trying it out as you go, not taking the risk, reducing your CVCs. And even we call MSO a sweet spot. Actually, it's a sweet zone. You're never going to get to one particular spot. There will be a zone on a farm, and if you're not at MSO now and you're overstocked, then it will take you 4, 5 or 6, maybe more years to get to that point, because it's too risky to go any other way but slowly.
Sounds like good advice. And Colin, did you have any final comments before we finish?
I just wanted to say, apropos the whole business of whether one is optimistic about the future or indeed has hope. I would just say, of course, that hope is a very different thing from optimism. And it's very difficult to be optimistic in the present time, but one has to be hopeful. I think, though, there's a lot to be hopeful about, funnily enough. But most of the for example, the whole increased rising increase in the need to keep the biosphere in good heart. I mean, not only for our own reasons, but because it is intrinsically important, necessary, but also the feeling that against that, I mean, a question came up against what about the new agricultural bill, etc. It seems to me that the mindset of governments and of big business and of financiers, who after all are the people who call the shots, is more or less almost entirely antipathetic to what we're really talking about. I mean, you know, the agricultural bill, I haven't looked at it in detail, but what I have seen of it, there's a sort of feeling that our main concern must be to plug British agriculture into the global market. Again, we're looking for trade deals with America and all the rest of it. That is very discouraging. On the other hand, there's the rise of interest in community ownership, community farming, etc. The strength of communities to make changes. So that's encouraging. So I think it's a bit of a race, to be honest, between what we might call us and them, which is a sad way to put it, but that's the way it is.
Okay, thanks, Colin. I am very conscious it's now 3 o'clock, and I'm not sure whether we suddenly get cut off or whether we have a few minutes time, but I'm sure we've all got lots of other things you need to be getting on with. So I'd just like to thank our 2 speakers, Chris and Colin, for their time and for their very, very interesting and thought-provoking talks. I think we've all probably going to be going away thinking hopefully hopeful and positive, but with some really clear ideas of what we can do. And thank you all of you for joining in. I think it's really important to hear first-hand experience of farmers and advisors working in this sector. So, and I think, you know, there's never more of a great time for having an organisation like the Penny Farming Network to have been born 2 or 3 years ago and be already having such a powerful influence, whether it's banging on the doors of DEFRA and the ministers, and in the devolved countries, all working with farmers and inspiring farmers to think about change. So I think well done to the Nature Friendly Farming Network for making the progress they have over the last few years. So exciting times, challenging times, but I think we've got a good roadmap to follow and some good ideas to take that forward. And I couldn't finish without saying trees are also a great natural asset to have on farms. So as I'm allowed to do that as chair, I think. So, but thank you all very, very much. And yeah, hope to see you all again soon.
Thanks, Helen. Thank you very much.
Did you want to say anything finally before?
No, I was just saying, I've just popped up on the website. If anybody wants to read Chris's Less is More report, we have it on the Nature Friendly Farming website. So you can go and have a look at it and read it in depth to see what else he had to say.
And of course, I forgot to say, go to visit the exhibition area on the conference platform for Nature Friendly Farming Network's details and how to join them, whether you're a farmer or a member of society. It's all free, and there you can really help to influence their work. And yeah, let's see. The Ag Bill comes back on Monday, so there's going to be a hashtag concentrating on trying to protect the trade deal amendments. So hashtag Save Our Standards. So yeah, if we could all join in and really push that we've got to protect and grow and improve our welfare and environmental standards.
Could I just add that sustain has got a